moving on to our next subject, wanted to do this because we've got a lot of new ROS, and it's really important for us to be able to understand the whole of the ROS. So this is an orientation to ROS, and it's also state ROS coordinator training. And we're going to, like Angela's presentation you just saw there and the other training documents we have, we're going to share them with you so that you can look on at your own pace at some other time, as well as we want to post a number of these things like these quarterly calls, like this kind of training class here on the CRCPD ROS portal, so you can go and look at it. Like, what did they say you're supposed to do when you want to document your training using Mission Edge, or maybe using spreadsheets or Word documents, or maybe, how do we deploy people for exercises? So we're going to have all that going out for you shortly. This is agenda for this training. Again, it kind of is putting together a ROS orientation and then this AHJ SRC training. And to make sure some of this is very new to many of you, that you're aware of these roles. Some of you been doing this a while, you're really comfortable with them, but obviously we should all feel comfortable. I like this definition here: radiological and nuclear emergency response and recovery subject matter expert. It summarizes a lot with a few words. They're big words. They're not the easiest and most frequently used words, and not everyone's going to be as comfortable as we are, but that summarizes the ROS. The AHJ is a person who is able to say, yep, you should be able to work as a type 3-2-1 ROS in this jurisdiction. Usually we're working at state level jurisdiction, so it's often the radiation control program director for the state. In some states, we've asked the radiation control program director if he or she wanted to be the authority having jurisdiction or the state ROS coordinator, and they've said no to both, and they've actually passed it on to, for example, their emergency management agency head as the authority having jurisdiction. They might stay on as the state ROS coordinator, or they might leave it up to the authority having jurisdiction in emergency management to appoint a state ROS coordinator. We have to be flexible here because, as we all know, of the 50 states, there's some similarities, but there's a lot of differences, and we need to be able to accommodate all those differences. Similarly with the state ROS coordinator. Now, the state ROS coordinator is purely a development of ours. The AHJ is actually a term of art for a lot of different processes in usually government or responsibility in organizations or jurisdictions. And it has some definitions that are out there. They seem to be very specific to that organization or the process. Similar to ours is pretty specific to our jurisdictions, which are usually states, sometimes counties, and sometimes municipalities, but mostly states, and often radiation control programs. But the state ROS coordinator is entirely us. We've created this as a position with the vote of all 50 of the state radiation control program directors. It was vote 48-2 to have each state appoint a state ROS coordinator. And This person's appointed by the AHJ to help the ROS, or people who want to become ROS and to assimilate ROS into the jurisdiction's radiological emergency preparedness capability. They don't have to be a ROS, but surely it's helpful, and a lot of them are. For example, in Vermont, I'm both the AHJ and the state ROS coordinator. It's pretty easy for me. In California, they have totally different situation with 79 trained ROS. They've got a different AHJ and a different state ROS coordinator. And they might even develop an assistant state ROS coordinator because there's so much work to do. And of course, our federal leadership is in the FEMA Office of Emerging Threats. The CRCPD provides that that state and local territorial perspective, as well as trying to maintain a broad look across all of the state, local, territorial jurisdictions to ensure that if you want a ROS in Iowa and you seek a type 1 from California or from Georgia, you're going to get somebody that can do the work that's in the position task book and in the position qualification. The Homeland Security Emergency Response Committee 4 is really where all of that takes place at CRCPD. We've got, I don't know, about 15 people that are on the committee right now, and almost all of them are leaders of sections or groups that are really, or branches that are really important processes and need help, as I suggested, and we hope that many of you will volunteer to join us in this effort. The steering committee is extremely important because they have been, as the name implies, steering this from the beginning. And it started with FEMA, DHS, DOE, with FEMA in the lead, as they often are as a coordinating agency, and DHS and DOE providing a variety of technical and financial support mechanisms. And then as the ROS got into the testing phase, CRCPD was added, and it's the CRCPD HSER4 chair that represents CRCPD in that steering committee. John Gill represents the FEMA Office of Emerging Threats. Jeff Chapman represents the Department of Energy National Nuclear Security Administration leadership, and Elliot Calhoun represents the Department of Homeland Security National Urban Security Technology Laboratory leadership. The ROS grew out of a nationwide review of our vulnerabilities following 9/11. And, we frankly were caught with our pants down, and it was horrible. Many thousands of deaths, incredible changes to our lives by those terrorist attacks. And in this nationwide review, 15 different planning scenarios were identified, and one of them is the nuclear detonation. In fact, the number one of the 15 planning scenarios. We'll show all of those in a moment. And it was identified that while the federal government, like DOE and especially EPA, NRC, had a lot of radiological and nuclear emergency capability, the states sometimes didn't. In many cases, even if they did, it wasn't enough. And this gap of state and local subject matter expertise was addressed by the development of the ROS. And that occurred in the late 2000s into 2014 when CRCPD got involved and we piloted the ROS as the first time in a national level exercise at Vibrant Response 14. And from then on, we piloted numerous other exercises, and the CRCPD provided the subject matter experts to be those ROS. And the exercises were usually in these two of the 15 planning scenarios I mentioned earlier, the nuclear detonation, in fact, a lot of the exercises were nuke det, and RDD, radiological attack. And we've had a lot more tabletops that are RDD. Most of the RDDs have not been full scale, while most of the nuke det have been full scale, which is kind of appropriate given the extensive nature of impacts of a nuclear detonation. And yet, not enough of either, and that's why we need the vests. So during the deployment of CRCPD subject matter experts as ROS in exercises for nuke power plants, RDD, and nuke det, Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory sent out evaluators with each of them who evaluated the work of the ROS and evaluated the kinds of help that the people the ROS were helping needed. And all of that was part of what's called a job task analysis. They looked at the skills, knowledge, and abilities that ROS should have, according to people who wanted ROS, like emergency management agencies, other members of government and state and local, and then talk to people who knew about the rad nuke emergency and found skills, knowledge, and abilities that they thought they, as ROS, should have to provide those services. And all of that was compiled by Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory into a format that became the objectives for a training course. And those training courses were started in 2016 with the first 16 students. A second pilot was hosted by the CDC. We had 31 students, and then CTOS taught 4 classes in 2018, or 3 more classes in 2018 to get it piloted and to meet FEMA's National Domestic Preparedness Consortium requirements. And it became a part of the catalog and then was reformatted to meet certain other requirements and interrupted by COVID-19. But thankfully, the CTOS course was developed, and CTOS hired leading ROS to be the instructors of that through today. These are the basic health physics knowledge elements that were incorporated into the objectives of the training. You can see measurements, instrumentation, standards and requirements, hazards analysis and controls, operations, procedures, fundamentals of education. And they were broken down into whether someone needed to have a really strong knowledge of them, kind of average knowledge or basic awareness. So using those terms, intermediate, novice, and aware. And for each of them. And so from this, it was possible, along with the tools knowledge and capacity to use those tools, you could see atmospheric dispersion modeling, planning of monitoring, dose assessment, information management, interpreting tool data products from Mac and iMac, having foundation and doctrine. All of this created foundations of the objectives and the lesson plan that all of you that have been to PER 388 have benefited from. That was really the big thing from 2014 to 2018, is getting that course squared away. 2019 was focused on getting the FEMA 509, as we call it, which is a position qualification. All the NIMS positions have them. They describe the type 1, 2, 3, 4 levels of a resource. It can be anything from human resource to even machines and devices. And then the position task book for humans, whereby it describes if you want to be a type 4, 3, 2, or 1, here are the actual tasks you must master. And you can find those if you go to these links in the document here. This is the first page of that position qualification. You can see here at the bottom the FEMA 509 designation. They're all given that number and then a specific number. 2017 was the first start of it, and then 2019 was the first revision, and this is the latest revision. You can see type 1, 2, 3. Those are fully qualified, can work on their own. Type 4 have to work under the supervision of a type 3 or higher. Excuse me. And you can also have them working in a strike team or a task force, working under a type 1 or type 2. But you can see further pages, there's 7 pages of this, go through the experiential, educational, and training requirements of each type. So here again, the key players, I've talked about them already, but really important parts. FEMA, OET coordinate all of it. The ROS steering committee makes sure that the national goals are met, and the members are the EHS, which really provides most of the funding, and DOE, which provides a lot of the experience, the exercises that we go to, Silent Thunder, Cobalt Magnet, a lot of that is funded by the Department of Energy. And then, of course, FEMA managing and CRCPD managing from the federal and state levels, respectively. The program has been very generously supported over the years. Congress actually gets reports on the development of the ROS, and similarly, its sister programs, the COS and the BOSS, and the ROS was the first in association with the development of the training, initial training. There also has been the 509 in the position task book, the toolkit in RAD Responder, CBURN Responder. We'll talk about a little bit more here. The job aids, I'll show you those in a moment. Thing called ROS Ready Curriculum that FEMA now owns, and some states are looking at for some universities application to graduate health physicists that are ROS ready. They're able to more likely assimilate into the ROS class and then into positions in emergency management, radiation protection, and other areas as emergency preparedness subject matter experts. And then most recently, the virtual evaluation scenario tool funded by DHS through work of FEMA and contractors to FEMA and DOE, and as multiple national level tabletop and full scale exercises. Here are the job aids that I referred to. There's one for the incident command system overall, one for the planning process, often described by the planning P, and you'll see the planning P is about every other page there, where it talks about each of the different meetings in the battle rhythm of emergency response and recovery, and then specific job aid for emergency operations centers where ROS are more likely to work. You might have some ROS at the incident command post. You might have some ROS in the field, say staging areas or other places like that. But ROS are often going to be in state, county, or municipal emergency operations centers. And a lot of great tools went into the ROS toolkit. That's what's shown down here. You click the button that says resources or enter, and it opens up 7 different pages of guidance for population monitoring, screening, for perimeters, for protection, different isotope fact sheets, all kinds of good stuff that's been vetted to be really ROS beneficial. And all of these are in Rad Responder, which is meant to be a tool that ROS are essentially subject matter experts on too. So we hope that that develops in most of you as a level of expertise. The ROS are also provided a variety of other supports, including that from the CRCPD. This is the ROS portal, its current page for launching into a whole variety of services. This is public facing, so anybody can look here. So a lot of people Googling the ROS will find this as a place to learn. I've shared with you the HISN, which is our password protected area for ROS and ROS partners. And that is really quite valuable in being able to have some things that we can't share with the public, some things that we'd like to work on internally, and something that would be very valuable in an incident, because that's what the HISN is often used for, is incident response. And then we have qualification. So this is our transition from the ROS orientation to the state ROS coordinator, but why we need both the orientation and the state ROS coordinator is in this ROS qualification process. Obviously, all of you been through PER 388 to finish the first step. You complete all of the prerequisites to the CTOS class, and in the certificates and the certificate for PER 388, you become a type 4. You can then work on the tasks to become 3, 2, or 1. And when you do tasks, you get them signed off by either a higher ranked ROS or the AHJ or his or her appointee. For example, an AHJ might say that your boss can sign you off, your supervisor can sign you off. We had Greg Thunderberg, we shared with you, he's had some of his work signed off by his fire chief. And so that's a good way to have the AHJ delegate that authority as they can to your direct supervisor. The process moves on from there to, once you've completed all the tasks for the type 3 PTB or the type 2 or the type 1, you do them one at a time. You get it signed off by usually your lead evaluator, or it can be signed off by the AHJ. And an independent review is conducted by the CRCPD QRB, Qualification Review Board. And with their review, they recommend to the AHJ that that individual could be certified. And that's what the AHJ is designated as, the certifying official to actually issue credentials. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to get a badge in some sort of uniform, although in some cases it might, but it's usually clear indication. For example, our QRB sends you a letter that we have certified you or recommended certification for you. Here's the position task book. You download that. You can look at the whole thing if you haven't already, of course. There are a total of 63 tasks, 41 for type 3, 15 more for type 2, 7 for type 1. Type 3 is the toughest because we want all of them to be technically sound for all 3 scenarios, the NPP, the NUCDET, and RDD. Type 2s are able to lead a ROS task force, while a type 1 can lead multiples. And like anything else, to be at the top requires a lot. And that's why there's fewer type 1s than 2s and 3s and 4s. The evaluation record form is also within the PTB. This is a critical document to link tasks to the PTB and the PTB evaluator and the evaluating event. The events, which are here in the looks like seventh line down, name and location of incident or simulation / exercise, and then the incident kind. This is what separates the ERFs. The evaluation record forms are usually done on a event basis. So you were at the cobalt magnet exercise, you accomplished these 20 tasks. That would get one evaluation record form, and the individual would sign all this off. Now, this is the paper version of it. We've had people use the paper version. Most people have so far. But a lot of people now going to be moving to doing this on Mission Edge because it is more efficient, as Angela was sharing earlier. It's a good way for us to make sure we don't lose things because it's automation. It's a way that machines can help us. As a part of that process, though, this ERF doesn't exist. That's why when Angela was referring to creating a comment or submitting a document, if that can be serving the form of the evaluation record, i.e. giving your name, giving a number that tracks it to the PTB tasks, your evaluator's name, information about them, and then the incident where you did this and when you did this, that can help us in the QRB as we try to give our recommendation as to the documentation and qualification of a candidate for advancement by type. The other steps of final evaluator verification and agency certification are actually easier done in Mission Edge. And yet you could do it in paper too. That's how a lot of the people that do this as a regular basis, like wildland firefighters, people that are in, for example, the Department of Energy, all of them have PTBs. They fill out forms oftentimes, and they're just starting to change to automated methods, just like we are. All right, for the final part of this, it's the state ROS coordinator specific aspect. And as it's described here, a vital link between the national ROS program, the AHJ, or the ROS. ROS are trained, as we've said, and we hope that all state ROS coordinators eventually become them, and that radiation control program directors do too, but that's not required. In some cases, you'll find that your state ROS coordinator really isn't a ROS, and you'll have to help them understand some things about that. That's why maybe your AHJ or another ROS or your supervisor can be a better evaluator for you. Also that some ROS are from government agencies, are easily assimilated into that government's organization and plans. Others are not, like they come from academia, medicine, laboratories. We want to try to get these unaligned ROS, they don't have a state government organization that they work in, into the organization of that state. And even some ROS are coming out of states, because there's only 37 states that are actually participating in the ROS program. I'll show you in a minute which ones they are. But those in other states may actually need to join ROS in a neighboring state. Let's say Idaho, they don't have a ROS coordinator, authority having jurisdiction. That person in Idaho might go to Oregon or Washington or even Nebraska to work with the state ROS coordinator and AHJ there. That's a model that the Urban Search and Rescue organization includes as a part of their qualification system, cadre management system too. Once you do get connected to a jurisdiction, we hope that you get incorporated into the planning, the training, and that's where we sell ROS to state and local jurisdictions. Is ROS can help you. They don't have to be on your payroll. They can do some things like train responders, develop RDD or nuke debt plan. They can learn about nuclear power plants that are in the neighboring states so that you can be prepared, maybe even have a plan, despite the fact that you're not inside the 50-mile or 10-mile EPZ, or maybe even if it's advanced small modular reactors in the future, and there's no offsite response organization to be part of your response organization as volunteers from the Ross cadre. So what do we want state Ross coordinators to do? This is really the crux of the biscuit here. We've got first is to try to maintain a roster of Ross in your jurisdiction. This is helped a lot by what we do at FEMA OET and in Mission Edge and at CRCPD. We'll provide that roster to you so as a state Ross coordinator so that you can better that against what you have on your book and update us when there are people join or leave, or you're trying to figure out whether people have joined or left. Second is to help Ross connect with evaluators. That could be the AHJ, it could be Ross of a higher type, it could be their supervisor, and then help them understand some of the processes here, because maybe you've got a better understanding of Mission Edge than they do. Maybe you worked with some other Ross in the past, or maybe by working with those of us that are in HSER4 and have been doing this for over 10 years now and really know how we can help people advance by type. As I mentioned, our key focus right now with 500 trained people is getting them advancing from type 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. So we've got a 1 in every state. We've got multiple type 2s and 3s in every state. And the third function is to helping Ross get trained, and this is done through CTOS. The specific person right now is Dave Pasquale, and I can get his email. You can also contact CTOS at nv.doe.gov, and you can ask them if you wanted to talk to Dave. Dave's the Ross training manager at CTOS. He is also the person you can talk to if you want to have a class in your state. Like Kansas just did this. They got 30 new Ross now because they held a class there. And we're always glad to do that. We're also hopeful that some other states in underserved regions can get some training. They've got instructions on how people register at the link here, Center for Radiological Nuclear Training homepage. We want to help them get their FEMA registration form filled out, help them connect to the state training coordinator. This is an official person who is usually in emergency management or homeland security in the state. They are appointed by usually the governor or governor's designee, like the emergency management director, to be the FEMA state training coordinator. That coordinator needs to sign off all the registrations that go to CTOS, as well as the individual's supervisor, who's often the authority having jurisdiction. And if the person doesn't have a supervisor in state government, they can use the authority having jurisdiction for that signature. So other things that we hope that state Ross coordinators will do is obviously advocating for Ross to get them involved in planning, responding, recovery, training. What we hope is that if you don't have an RDD plan or an IND plan or nuclear power plant in your neighboring state plan, that they'll develop it for you. And then maybe you'll have them train. They get signed off in their task book and you get free labor. It's a great tool. We do it here. I'm on the state hazmat team in Vermont, and we give training all over the state, and the fire departments love it. And it helps us to be better in our roles as hazmat technicians and officers. We also hope that the state Ross coordinator shares radiological and nuclear information with the Ross in their jurisdiction. They're a point of contact if there's any real incidents in the state, whether they're Ross who are homegrown or they've been brought in by mutual aid, either from jurisdictions within the state or using IMAC for outside of the state. And then to help FEMA OET and the CRCPD, Homeland Security, but we are there to help the state ROS coordinators too. So these are the 37 states that are participating right now. We got a couple of states. Rhode Island is missing both the authority having jurisdiction and the state ROS coordinator. It was the same person. He took another job somewhere. Michigan is currently missing their state ROS coordinator. TR and I have recently talked and looking at what to do there, but we will always work to try to help all of these people, whether they are the certifying official here in the left column with emails or the state ROS coordinator there in the right side of the spreadsheet. And we're always hoping too that we grow this further. But you know, they have this thing called the Organization of Agreement States that have agreements with the NRC to have jurisdiction over radioactive materials. Until recently, there were only 37 of them. Now there's going to be 42 of them. And it takes time to get all the states on board for some of these approaches. So this is what we've talked about. I'm not going to reiterate it because of time, but we're again going to pull this whole thing out as a separate ROS orientation slash state ROS coordinator slash authority having jurisdiction training, and then we'll put it on the CRCPD website so anybody can go and look at it and use it for a reminder about important